No problem is a problem. This familiar Toyota adage is a potent reminder that the absence of issues is, in fact, the most alarming concern. John Shook's Managing to Learn is far more than a technical manual. It's a compelling narrative about how a company like Toyota transformed the A3, a large report-sized sheet of paper, into a powerful thinking methodology. It became a framework for seeing, analyzing, and learning from problems on every page. The author doesn't just introduce the A3 structure. He recounts a young manager's challenging learning journey under the guidance of a mentor. Through this, an entire culture of learning from mistakes emerges, where practical work drives strategic thinking, and problem-solving becomes a means of developing people. But the book's most profound provocation lies not in its techniques, but in a paradox. How can a mere 11x 17-inch piece of paper encapsulate an entire colossal management system? And if the A3 is truly a tool for learning, what should we fear more? Making mistakes while filling it out, or living in an organization where everything appears smooth, yet no one is truly learning anything? Asterisk Chapter 1. What is an A3? The name sounds deceptively small. An A3 is simply an international standard paper size, exactly 11x 17 inches. Yet, this very size becomes a gateway to an entire universe of thought. A massive organization chooses to distill every problem onto a single page. This seemingly paradoxical act is the key that makes the entire system operate with transparency and discipline. With an A3, everyone looks through a common lens. There are no longer thick, data-laden reports, no more dazzling slides to showcase achievements. Instead, a single sheet of paper compels the writer to eliminate redundancy, leaving only the most essential elements. The problem is laid bare, the objectives are clearly outlined, and from there, new paths to solutions emerge. The A3 sheet becomes like a resume, but not for an individual rather, for the very problem the organization is facing. It's akin to a storyboard, where every detail is deliberately arranged to guide the reader from context and current state to the core conflict and its resolution. What makes the A3 special isn't the paper's size, but the forced articulation of its underlying thought logic. Each organization can adapt the presentation, but the fundamental sequence of questions remains unchangeable. What is the problem? Who owns the problem? Where are the root causes? What countermeasures can be proposed? How will consensus be reached? What is the implementation plan? How will success be known? And finally, how will it be followed up for continuous learning? Thus, the A3 is both a communication tool and a thought training process. Writers cannot simply transcribe data. They must tell a story, and that story must be clear enough for anyone picking up the sheet to follow the flow from the top left to the bottom right, like reading a journey with a beginning, middle, and end. Toyota quickly realized that in an organization, arguments often get bogged down by the question of who has the authority to decide. But when an A3 is placed on the table, the question shifts. What is the right way to handle this? By forcing everyone to focus on facts and data instead of power, the A3 transforms debate into a dialogue about responsibility. The A3 owner doesn't necessarily hold administrative power, but they are the true owner of the problem. They put pen to paper. Their name is on the bottom right of the sheet. This means they are responsible for leading the dialogue, gathering opinions, seeking consensus, and ultimately, implementing the solution. Therefore, the A3 is not just a tool for engineers or managers. It has become the currency of Toyota's management system. Like currency, it can be exchanged, validated, and used to measure understanding and commitment. Each A3 not only solves a specific problem, but also leaves a trace of the learning process. In reality, Toyota never set out to deploy the A3 process. It wasn't a movement. It emerged naturally as the organization connected strategic objectives, Hashin Kanri, at a macro level with operational problem-solving at a micro level, all on one sheet of paper. These two levels were linked. Strategy was translated into specific work, and specific work, in turn, fed back into understanding the strategy. So, when discussing the A3, it cannot be seen merely as a form. It is a standardized way of thinking that permeates the entire organization. From a fresh graduate sitting at their desk to a senior manager overseeing a multi-million-dollar expansion project, Everyone must know how to tell their story on that sheet of paper. Outsiders might see it as a procedure, a paperwork exercise. But for those involved, it is a process of sharpening their thinking. An A3 might be rewritten 10 times, torn up, revised, and rewritten again. Each time, the writer must scrutinize their own thoughts. Have I truly identified the right problem? Do I sufficiently understand the root cause? Have I proposed a reasonable solution? These cycles of writing and rewriting are what generate true learning. When viewing the A3 as a management tool, what emerges is not merely a piece of paper, but an organizational habit of facing reality directly, grasping logic, and learning together. And it is this habit that keeps a complex system like Toyota continuously evolving, continuously improving, without breaking down under its own complexity. To understand the essence of the A3, one must look closely at its internal structure. It's no accident that Toyota shaped a sequence of systematically arranged components. Each box on the paper is not just a blank frame, but a doorway compelling the writer to confront a fundamental question. It begins with the title, seemingly simple, yet the title is the declaration of the asterisk-real asterisk problem. Writing the wrong title means the entire A3 goes off track. A single line at the top of the page doesn't just name, it forces the writer to correctly identify what is happening. Next is the asterisk context asterisk. Why is this important? What in the organization's overall operations makes this problem worthy of attention here? The writer must paint the background, showing why this problem cannot be ignored. Context transforms a minor incident into a story connected to a larger objective. After context comes the asterisk current state asterisk. This is not a place to simply copy disparate data, but a place to accurately describe reality using facts, images, and charts. The writer is forced to expose: where do things stand today? What is the deviation? What is the specific situation? At Toyota, this means going directly to the Gemba, the actual place where the work happens, to see with one's own eyes, not relying on rumors or speculation. From the current state, we then move to the asterisk target asterisk. What does the organization want to achieve here? A target is not just a number, but a vision of a desired future state. The target itself creates momentum, clearly indicating the direction. An A3 cannot be without a target, for without a destination, all actions become disconnected. Then comes the asterisk root cause analysis asterisk. This is the heart of the A3. Instead of stopping at symptoms, the writer must dig down to the root. Toyota is famous for its 5 whys, asking why 5 times to peel back each layer concealing the problem. Only when the root cause is exposed can a solution be genuinely founded. Otherwise, the proposed measures are mere patches, and the problem will recur in a different form. Once the root cause is clear, the A3 moves to asterisk countermeasures asterisk. Here, the author is not allowed to make vague statements. The countermeasures must be specific and tightly linked to the analyzed root causes. What will be done differently, and why will that specifically address the root? Each countermeasure must demonstrate a direct link to a cause. Otherwise, it's just a false solution. When countermeasures have been proposed, an asterisk action plan asterisk is needed. Who will do what and when? The plan is a concrete promise, not just a wish. At Toyota, a plan is often described using a Gantt chart or responsibility matrix, clearly showing each step, the responsible person, and the timeline. The plan is not for show, but to ensure the countermeasures have a real path forward. Finally, there is asterisk follow-up asterisk. An A3 doesn't end when the paper is completed. Follow-up means anticipating potential issues, establishing mechanisms to verify results, and documenting lessons learned for the entire organization to absorb. This is a closed loop where one person's experience becomes the collective knowledge of many. Each of these components does not exist in isolation, but connects in a tight logical flow. From title to follow-up is a continuous stream: problem, cause, solution, action, learn. If one link is missing, the entire story falls apart. In practice, Toyota has never declared there is only one definitive A3 template. The format can change, the boxes can be adjusted, but the fundamental sequence of questions is immutable. The core isn't the form of the paper, but the way it compels the writer to go through a PDCA cycle: plan, do, check, act. This is why an A3 is considered a structured story. It's not a cold collection of data, but a journey from problem to solution. That story has conflicts, knots, and ways to untangle them. Reading an A3 is following a Toyota learning journey. It's said that an A3 is like a mirror. When you read it, you don't just see the problem, but also how the writer thought, analyzed, and learned. That's why every employee, from new hires to seasoned managers, must practice with the A3. It's not just a management tool, but a way to cultivate scientific thinking in each individual. By obligating the entire organization to tell stories using the same structure, the A3 creates a common language, eliminating aimless arguments due to misunderstanding. An A3 is presented, and everyone can look together, read together, and ask questions together. And it is there that consensus is formed, not from power, but from truth. Once we grasp each constituent component, we fully appreciate the meaning of standardized storytelling. An A3 is a story, but not a fictional one. It's a story of reality. It has a beginning with context, a development section where the current state and causes are analyzed, a climax in the conflicts, and a resolution through countermeasures and an action plan. The fascinating thing about the A3 is that it never truly closes. When the writer fills in the follow-up section, the story continues into subsequent chapters. Issues arise, deviations need correction, and lessons need to be preserved. An A3 doesn't just resolve a situation, it plants the seeds for subsequent learning cycles. Crucially, an A3 is not for display, it's for sparking dialogue. The problem owner writes the sheet, but that sheet exists to be debated, questioned, and revised. It's like a chessboard where everyone places their pieces, analyzes moves, and together finds the optimal path. An A3 cannot be completed in silence. It only comes alive when many people participate. Therefore, there's no single fixed template for all A3s. Frames can be added or removed, and formats can change. But what cannot be omitted is the sequence of questions that forces thinking through the PDCA cycle. The A3 is just paper. What's important is the flow of thought it initiates. At Toyota, the A3 is likened to the currency of learning. It circulates from a young engineer's desk to the boardroom. It's validated, exchanged, revised, and then passed on to the next person. Each A3 doesn't just reflect a solution, but also records the learning footprint of the entire organization. This leads to an intriguing paradox. The more A3s are written, the organization doesn't accumulate more paperwork, but more shared understanding. Each sheet reduces pointless arguments, repetitive errors, and hasty firefighting. Instead, it gradually builds an intangible asset: the collective capacity to identify problems, analyze them, and improve. Precisely for this reason, Toyota doesn't treat the A3 as a management initiative to be implemented as a campaign. It wasn't introduced as a novel management tool, but grew organically as a natural habit. Whenever a problem arose, instead of discussing or blaming, people would say, "Let's write an A3." And from there, dialogue would begin and learning would occur. An A3 is not a fancy report. It is a mirror reflecting the thinking process. Looking at it, one sees the honesty in confronting the current state, the discipline in analysis, and the commitment in action. It also shows what the writer has learned from their own problem. In conclusion, the A3 is not just a problem-solving tool, but a process for developing people. By compelling every individual to go through a sequence of scientific questions, it cultivates the habit of observation, analysis, experimentation, and learning. By transforming individual stories into a common language, it creates the capacity for collective learning, and it is there that Toyota finds its strength: an organization that continuously learns from its own daily work. That international-sized sheet of paper, seemingly simple at first glance, is where the collective memory and evolutionary capacity of an entire system are stored. The A3 stands as proof that simplicity, when honed to its core, can carry the power of complexity. Asterisk Chapter 2, Grasping the Situation, Going to the Gemba asterisk. The U.S. subsidiary of a Japanese manufacturer was entering an aggressive expansion phase. This plan would nearly double the size of the existing plant, expanding production lines and increasing capacity. This, in turn, meant a mountain of technical documents, guides, and standards that needed translation from Japanese to English. In the first startup, those documents had been a nightmare. Incorrect translations, missed deadlines, ballooning costs, and compromised work quality. Now preparing for the new expansion, Ken Sanderson knew he couldn't let those mistakes recur. He called Porter, a young manager, to his desk, not to hand him a detailed plan, but to give him a blank sheet of paper. On it, Porter was to write the preliminary A3 for this problem. The task sounded simple: review the entire document translation process, assess the current situation, and propose solutions. But for Porter, sitting before a blank page was utterly bewildering. He'd heard of A3s, had seen a few simple ones, but this was the first time he had to face a critical task tied to a multi-million-dollar expansion project. He knew that in the company's lean system, the A3 wasn't just a form but a common language for dialogue, but knowing is different from doing. And now he had to do it. Porter wondered if he could quickly write out solutions, provide some numbers, and fulfill the request. But Sanderson wouldn't let him take the easy route. Instead of simply dictating what to do, Sanderson was patient. He wanted Porter to own the problem, to learn how to ask the right questions, and to get to the heart of the matter. Sanderson's attitude wasn't accidental. In the Toyota environment, a manager isn't someone who provides ready-made answers. A manager guides employees to learn how to face problems directly. There are no magic solutions without understanding reality. Therefore, the first thing Porter had to do was not to write, but to go and see asterisk. From that point, the idea of making the problem visible became the foundation for every step. Instead of hiding difficulties, instead of sugarcoating reports, Porter's task was to bring the truth to the surface. That truth might not be pretty, it might make others uncomfortable, but it was the only basis for building genuine solutions. Porter began to feel the weight of the blank sheet of paper before him. It wasn't an administrative exercise, it was a commitment that he would scrutinize reality, not easy assumptions. He had to learn to see, to listen, and to ask so that the A3 wouldn't be a lifeless page, but a mirror reflecting the true situation. The first step in grasping the situation wasn't writing, but going to the Gemba, the actual place where the work happens. Only there does the truth become clear, and only there does an A3 begin to have meaning. Porter left his office. He knew that sitting in front of a screen or reorganizing old reports wouldn't bring him closer to the truth. To clarify the problem, he had to go to where it was happening. That was the principle of Gemba, where real value is created. He started in the departments directly responsible for translation. Thick stacks of documents piled up, many original Japanese versions difficult to read, crammed with diagrams, charts, and symbols. The translation contractors struggled to reproduce each drawing, maintaining technical meaning while ensuring absolute accuracy. Porter realized that the problem wasn't in one place, but spread throughout the translation supply chain. The more he observed, the clearer the complexity became. There were concise documents for the office that were easier to translate. Then there were hundreds of pages of dense technical documents, full of specialized terminology. And then there were work instructions placed right next to the production line, where any translation error could cause an accident. From this, Porter classified the documents into 3 groups: office documents, technical documents, and work instructions near the Gemba. Each group of documents brought with it a series of unique problems. Office documents were often translated quickly but lacked standardization. Technical documents were heavily specialized, requiring multiple cross-checks. Work instructions were sensitive. Even a single incorrect symbol could throw off an entire production operation. During his Gemba walk, Porter began to listen more than he spoke. He listened to technicians complain about translation errors that cost them hours to understand. He watched contractors trying to replicate diagrams, sometimes drawing them manually. He recorded instances of delayed deliveries and extra costs incurred due to faulty translations requiring rework. All these details became crucial pieces for the overall picture. The principle of Gemba, going to the actual place, seeing the actual things, gradually became Porter's guiding star. He realized that previously he was accustomed to hearing reports and then speculating. This time, Going directly to the source helped him see firsthand undeniable gaps and inefficiencies. He understood that this direct observation was the only way to get close to the real cause. Porter also began to notice a difference in his approach. Previously, he was easily swayed by intuition, thinking that simply choosing a better contractor would solve everything. But now, looking at reality, he saw the problem was multi-layered, from how original documents were prepared, how requirements were communicated, to the verification and feedback process. The problem couldn't be solved with a simple action. Grasping the situation isn't about writing down everything, but about knowing how to identify the key gap. The gap between the current state and the target is where the story needs to begin. And that could only become clear when he immersed himself in reality, instead of speculating from his office. After several days of observation and data collection, Porter sat down with the blank sheet Sanderson had given him. This time, he didn't write based on assumptions. Each box on the A3 began to fill with what he had seen with his own eyes and heard with his own ears. He started with the *** context ***. The Acme factory was expanding, doubling in size, requiring thousands of documents to be translated from Japanese to English. Translation was not merely linguistic transfer, but a critical condition for the new production lines to operate correctly from day one. Next, he outlined the *** current state ***. The existing translation process was fragmented and lacked standardization. Costs were increasing, deliveries were late, quality was often subpar, and many serious errors still reached the users. He categorized documents by group and department, pointing out where most problems originated. Then he set the *** target, 100% on-time delivery, no errors when the factory went live, and rework reduced to below 10%. These numbers weren't vague ambitions, but were derived from the critical needs of the expansion project. In the ** analysis * section, Porter mapped the current state of the translation chain. He clearly noted bottlenecks, areas generating extra costs, and gaps causing delays. A striking number emerged. Translation times ranged from 5 to 60 days. This enormous discrepancy showed that the current process lacked stability and couldn't be relied upon once the expanded factory was operational. He didn't rush to propose solutions. Instead, the next steps * section on the A3 indicated, confirm analysis with stakeholders, then develop countermeasures. That was Sanderson's way of teaching him, don't rush to fix before understanding the root. Porter also posed key questions to himself. Had he correctly identified the gap between the current state and the target? Had he truly gone to the Gemba and spoken with the people directly involved? Were the business objectives clear, connecting this problem to the larger picture? Was the data accurate and sufficient to draw conclusions? Had he truly reached the root cause, or was he still only seeing symptoms? Was this A3 concise enough to provoke critique and invite feedback? He considered presenting problems versus problems in the work. Presenting problems are the pains the organization feels right now, like cost overruns or late document deliveries. Problems in the work are deviations from the standard when an operation no longer matches its initial benchmark. To improve, both need to be identified, and to do that, standardization is essential. Only when the standard is clear can one measure the gap between the present and the desired state. Porter concluded his preliminary A3 with a completely different feeling than on day one. He was no longer haunted by the blank page. Instead, he saw on the paper the image of a story unfolding from context, current state, and target to analysis. That story didn't yet have an end, but it had a proper beginning. To solve a problem, one must first go and see, not speculate from afar. Chapter 3, Target and Analysis, Finding the Root Cause. Porter submitted his first A3 to Sanderson. He thought he had done reasonably well, listing problems, providing some data, and suggesting approaches. But Sanderson shook his head. He didn't scold him or entirely reject it. He just gently asked, "What is truly causing pain for the organization?" Porter hesitated. He immediately thought of costs. Indeed, costs were rising, and he had clearly written in the A3 that the translation process incurred an additional 10%. But Sanderson wouldn't let him stop there. He asked further, "Are costs the biggest pain, or are they just the surface manifestation of a deeper ailment?" Porter felt flustered. He was accustomed to a problem-solving approach focused on cost reduction. But Sanderson pointed elsewhere. The users of those documents, the engineers, the workers who have to read every line to operate the production line, they are the customers of this translation process. And if they struggle with incorrect, delayed, or hard-to-understand translations, the real pain isn't just about money, but about operational bottlenecks and risks. Sanderson sat Porter down, holding the A3, and said, "What I see in your paper is a series of symptoms, but you haven't proven the root cause. And until you see the root cause, all solutions are just patchwork." He continued, "Remember, symptoms and causes are never the same as solutions. If we confuse them, we'll chase the superficial, and then the solution easily becomes a firefighting exercise." Porter recalled how he had hastily proposed standardizing documents last time, believing it would solve the problem at its root. He thought he had found the way out, but Sanderson warned him, "You're holding a hammer looking for a nail, wanting to hit everything you see. Standardization might be correct, but first, you must confirm if it truly strikes the root cause." Sanderson called this the disease of many organizations. Don't be a hero. A hero is someone who rushes to put out a fire once it's raging. But that very culture prevents the organization from ever learning how to prevent fires from starting in the first place. Porter began to understand. If he kept trying to prove he had quick answers, he would only reinforce a system that celebrated firefighting instead of prevention. He looked back at his A3 and saw his own immaturity. The cost figures, the descriptions of the current state, only reflected the surface. They didn't point out what was preventing the organization from achieving its desired target. The questions Sanderson reiterated became a needle piercing through every layer of paper. What prevents us from reaching the target state? The paper before Porter became heavy again, but this time he didn't feel confused as he did initially. Instead, he felt a sense of necessity. He realized that if he didn't dare confront the root cause, every word he wrote would be meaningless. And that was precisely the challenge Sanderson wanted him to learn. Writing an A3 isn't about proving oneself, but about exposing the truth. Sanderson didn't rush to suggest solutions to Porter. Instead, he pushed him back to the blank boxes on the A3, target and analysis asterisk. If you're not clear about what you want to achieve and haven't truly peeled back the layers of the cause, then all the countermeasures you propose will be off target, he said. Porter realized he had been too quick. He had only gathered superficial facts, increased costs, delayed documents, low quality. But his mentor wanted him to transform that data into a logical story, a narrative thread guiding the reader from the current state to the future vision. An A3 is not a data repository. It's a structured story showing where we are, where we want to go, and what's stopping us, Sanderson emphasized to help Porter gain clarity. Sanderson provided Porter with a series of key questions. Had he correctly identified the real problem and the gap between the current state and the target? Had he gone to the Gemba and talked with those directly involved? Had he clarified the business objective to link this problem to the bigger picture? Was the data accurate and complete enough to confirm? Had he truly reached the root cause, or was he still just at the symptoms? Was the current A3 concise, clear, and impactful enough for others to read, see the connections, and provide feedback? Porter felt himself circling through these questions, but that very circling made him realize that the A3 wasn't a paper to fill out. It was a tool that forced him into scientific thinking. Sanderson introduced Porter to a familiar Toyota technique, the *5 whys ***. When a problem arises, don't stop at the first answer. Keep asking, why, repeatedly until the root cause is stripped bare. For example, why are documents delayed? Because the contractor is late. Why is the contractor late? Because the original documents are difficult to read and lack standardization. Why do they lack standardization? Because a standard process was not established from the beginning. And so on, each question taking one deeper. Porter began to clearly see the gap between his previous approach and what Sanderson wanted him to learn. Before, he only saw the surface and hastily offered solutions. Now, he was forced to be patient, take each step, ask questions repeatedly, and not overlook seemingly small details. Rewriting the A3 became a process of dialogue, not just between Porter and Sanderson, but also between Porter and the people directly using the documents. He needed to hear their pain, see their obstacles firsthand, and then incorporate those into the analysis box. Only then would the story on the paper truly gain weight. Porter held his pen, looking at the blank boxes. This time, he knew he couldn't write quickly. Each of Sanderson's questions was like a drill forcing him deeper, and that very process, full of confusion yet also full of awakening, was the most valuable lesson. Porter returned to his desk. This time, with data cross-referenced at the Gemba and with the direct users of the documents, he began to construct a provisional A3 capable of telling the story of the reality unfolding. In the **target*** section, he clearly wrote, "No errors in documents when the factory goes live, rework below 10%, and 100% on-time delivery." These weren't just pretty numbers, but the minimum requirements for the production line to start safely. In the **current state** section, he frankly exposed the situation. Translation costs had exceeded 10%, over 50% of documents were overdue, over 50% required rework, and many serious errors still reached the customer. More importantly, processing times varied from 5 to 60 days, a huge discrepancy, making the entire system unstable. Porter realized that this very variability was the biggest pain. One couldn't rely on a process that took 5 days today but 2 months tomorrow. If unresolved, the factory expansion goal would derail. In the *next step**, he didn't rush to write solutions. Instead, he wrote, "Confirm analysis with stakeholders, reach consensus on current state and root causes before proposing countermeasures." That was a shift in mindset. He learned that countermeasures are only meaningful when everyone sees the problem in the same way. Sanderson read through it and nodded. He didn't expect Porter to have a complete solution. What he wanted to see was a shift in thinking, from chasing symptoms to recognizing cause-and-effect relationships. Each box in the A3 was no longer disconnected, but linked together like chain segments. Context led to current state. Current state highlighted the target. The target created pressure to delve deeper into analysis. Analysis paved the way for countermeasures. Porter, for the first time, felt the A3 in his hand resembled a true story. That story had suffering people, hidden root causes, a desire to achieve a desired state, and a path forward. It wasn't dry data, nor was it a quick solution demonstration. It was evidence of a learning process. He understood that to become a true problem solver, he had to focus on the root cause. Only by seeing through the layers of symptoms could he build sustainable improvements. And that was the spirit Sanderson wanted to instill in him, someone who learns from work, not just reacts to it. Porter signed his name at the bottom corner of the A3, not as a formality, but as a commitment. He was the owner of this problem, and he would continue to lead the story to its next chapter. Chapter 4, Proposing Countermeasures, Decision-Making Through Set-Based Options. Porter had traversed the journey of observation and analysis. He had clearly identified the root causes of the chaos in the translation process. Now, he entered the stage where most people tend to rush, proposing countermeasures. Sanderson reminded him from the outset, "Don't lock in too early." Most managers make this mistake. They see a plausible solution and cling to it, as if only a single arrow is needed to hit the bullseye. But reality is rarely that simple. A complex problem always requires multiple parallel paths, gradually eliminating the wrong ones. This is the spirit of set-based thinking. Generating multiple options, keeping them alive for a while, challenging them with real data, and then choosing the strongest path. Porter struggled with this idea. He wanted to prove he had the right answer. But Sanderson, playing the role of mentor, wouldn't let him shortcut the process. Instead of praising or criticizing, he simply asked, "Have you explored all reasonable countermeasures? Did these options arise from real conversations at the Gemba with the people directly involved? Do they directly address the root causes you identified? Why do you think these actions are necessary in forming a countermeasure? Did you go back to verify?" Each question was like a rock pressing down. Porter understood that writing countermeasures was no longer a game of spontaneous creativity. It was a heavy responsibility to prove every line with facts. He began to circle back to colleagues in various departments. He opened his A3, shared the current state and root cause analysis, and then listened to their feedback. Each person added a perspective, sometimes contradictory, sometimes complementary. This process made his A3 continuously expand, contract, and reshape itself. On the board, colorful sticky notes appeared, from which Porter began to distill a set of potential countermeasures, changing how document flow was tracked, creating a standardized terminology database, adopting visual instruction templates instead of just text, improving translation and editing skills. But he hadn't yet made a decision. Sanderson watched him work, still silent. He knew the most critical moment wasn't when Porter wrote down a solution, but when he dared to accept that there wasn't a single correct solution yet. That was when a manager truly began to mature. Porter told himself, "This time, I won't look for an immediate knockout punch. I will keep many options open, allowing reality to eliminate them gradually, instead of me eliminating them hastily." Porter reopened his A3. This time, not just to write, but to look directly at each figure. In the asterisk context, current state, and target asterisk sections, he wrote concisely, Acme Factory expanding, doubling document translation needs. Translation costs exceeded 10%, over 50% delayed, over 50% required rework. Many errors reached customers. Translation times ranged from 5 to 60 days, an unacceptable level of variability. Facing this situation, his target remained unchanged. No errors when the factory operates, rework below 10%, 100% on-time delivery. From that picture, Porter began to write the asterisk root cause analysis asterisk section. He no longer allowed himself to list generalities. Each line was a truth verified at the Gemba. Translation volume arrived in large batches, making workload uneven and difficult to predict. No document flow tracking process, so no one knew exactly where a document was in the pipeline. Requester expectations were often vague, unclear about quality or deadlines. Poor source document creation skills, many disorganized, unstructured texts. Too many different document formats, lacking consistency. Technical terminology was inconsistent. The same concept had multiple expressions. Many complex production operations were described only in text, lacking visual illustrations. Insufficient translators, and many lacked necessary skills. Translated documents were not edited, allowing many basic errors to reach the customer. Porter looked at this list of causes and clearly saw that if each root wasn't addressed, the targets he wrote in the adjacent box would be mere illusions. He remembered Sanderson's words, "Prove the link between the cause and the countermeasure. If a countermeasure doesn't directly target a cause, discard it." Therefore, Porter didn't rush to write the countermeasures section. He wanted to ensure that every cause had been directly confronted, without avoidance. He returned to the Gemba once more. This time, he didn't just ask translators, but also engineers and workers, the people who had to use the documents to do their jobs. They spoke of frustrations he had never imagined: symbols translated incorrectly, unusable tables, lengthy instructions lacking illustrations. Each complaint reinforced the list of causes on his A3. Porter saw the difference in approach. Before, he often thought of finding one clever solution to solve everything. Now he understood that his job was to uncover all the true causes and then allow solutions to emerge from there. He sat before the paper, his pen gliding across the boxes, each line of analysis opening a door, preparing for the next step, writing the countermeasures. But this time, they wouldn't be vague declarations, but actions firmly linked to the causes. Having sufficiently exposed the causes, Porter began to write the asterisk countermeasures asterisk section. This time, he reminded himself not to let any proposal leave the paper if it wasn't tightly connected to an analyzed cause. For the untrackable document flow, he wrote, "Establish a flow control process where every document has a status code and everyone knows its location in the pipeline." For the inconsistent technical terminology, create a standardized terminology database, updated regularly so everyone uses the same language. For the issue of too many document formats, Porter proposed, develop standard templates with digitized images. Instead of lengthy descriptive paragraphs, complex operations will be visually illustrated, reducing the risk of misunderstanding even after translation. Regarding the lack of editing, he wrote, "Implement a final review step where translated documents are checked not only for language, but also for practical usability." And to address the lack of necessary translator skills, establish a training mechanism combined with more rigorous selection. Porter put down his pen and reviewed the cause-countermeasure matrix. It wasn't a random list of ideas, it was like a network where each thread connected a cause to a specific action. Sanderson held the A3 and asked, "Why is this measure necessary? Which cause does it solve? Is it suitable for the people working at the Gemba?" Porter answered each question in turn, not with excuses, but with data and on-site testimonials. That was when Sanderson saw Porter's progress. He no longer offered pretty solutions to impress, but proposed countermeasures validated by reality. He also no longer sought to quickly finalize one option, but accepted keeping multiple options alive for testing and gradual elimination. That was the spirit of set-based decision-making, letting reality choose instead of hasty instinct. Porter clearly felt a change. For the first time, he saw his A3 not just as paper, but as a tool that gave him the authority to act based on facts and logic. That authority wasn't bestowed by Sanderson, not compelled by his title, but earned by himself through proving the truth. He signed his name below the final box, not as a formality, but as a commitment. "I am responsible for pursuing, testing, and learning from these countermeasures." The A3 was now one step more complete, ready for the next stage, building the implementation plan and the follow-up mechanism. Asterisk Chapter 5, Plan and Follow-Up, Authority based on the pull principle asterisk. Porter now had a list of countermeasures linked to root causes, but everything would remain at the idea level if it wasn't transformed into a concrete action plan. Sanderson emphasized to him, who, what, when, where, and how must be clearly answered. An A3 doesn't just state the problem and solution, it must lay out the step-by-step path for implementation, with clear responsibilities. Porter spread out his A3 and began to fill in the plan asterisk section. Each line wasn't just a bullet point but a promise. If the name of the responsible person was missing, the plan became meaningless. If a specific timeline was absent, the plan was merely a dream. Therefore, he included metrics to measure progress and results so that anyone looking at it could see the standard for success or failure. Sanderson encouraged Porter to use a Gantt chart to illustrate the relationship between actions, timelines, and responsibilities. On the paper, boxes began to connect. Who would initiate the terminology database setup? Who was responsible for training the translation team? Who would oversee the final editing step? And by what date must everything be completed? The Gantt chart wasn't just a visual tool, it forced everyone to think along a time axis and mutual dependencies. Porter realized that writing a plan wasn't about ideal forecasting, like sketching a perfect scenario. It was a hypothesis. A hypothesis that if this sequence is followed, with clear responsibilities and specific timelines, the countermeasures will be effective. That hypothesis needed to be tested with action and data. Sanderson reiterated, "A plan is only meaningful if it shows a cause and effect link. From the root causes, we proposed countermeasures. Now, the plan must clearly specify each action taken to produce the desired result. Without that connecting thread, everything on paper is just a disconnected list." Porter looked at the plan gradually taking shape. Each line of text was no longer a simple task, but a link in a logical chain. He felt the weight of responsibility, but also a newfound clarity. This was the step of turning ideas into reality, where theory met action. Porter realized that simply finishing a plan wasn't enough. Problems never disappear just because we map out a roadmap. Sanderson reminded him, every plan is just a hypothesis, and a hypothesis must be tested. Therefore, alongside the plan, the A3 always has a box called asterisk follow-up asterisk asterisk. This isn't decorative, it's the section that determines whether the organization truly learns. He began to fill in that box with a PDCA mindset. Plan, do, check, act. The proposed plan was just the plan. The next 3 words, do, check, act, would determine the true value of the entire A3. He noted that each countermeasure needed accompanying evaluation metrics, who would measure them, the frequency of checks, and the adjustment mechanism. Sanderson wanted him to develop the habit of looking ahead. He asked, If this countermeasure is implemented, what could hinder it? What if progress is delayed? What if manpower is insufficient? What if the results are not as expected? Each "what if" question forced Porter to envision obstacles before they even appeared. That was the meaning of the follow-up section, not waiting until a stumble to fix it, but preparing the mindset and tools to fix it as soon as it happens. Additionally, Sanderson told Porter about how a master like Anasan used to mentor his subordinates. Instead of direct orders, Anasan would often hold an A3, read it carefully, and then ask questions like, "Why did you jump from this data point to that conclusion so quickly here? How does this relate to the objective in the box above? If the root cause is truly this, is that countermeasure logical?" These questions force the writer to self-correct their logic, rather than relying on the boss's authority. Porter realized an A3 only truly comes alive when it becomes a mentoring tool. The manager doesn't provide answers, but uses it to train the employee's thinking. Therefore, follow-up isn't just about monitoring actions, but also about sharing lessons. What one person learns must become the knowledge of many. More importantly, Porter felt the distinction of the *pull authority ** philosophy. In many organizations, power flows top-down. Subordinates act because the boss orders them to. But with the A3, authority is pulled from the responsible person. Porter wasn't acting because of Sanderson's title, but because the A3 in his hand contained logic, data, and commitment. He earned the authority to lead the process because everyone was compelled to respect the truth clearly documented on the paper. This was paradoxical yet powerful. The clearer and more transparent he wrote, the more authority Porter gained. Not borrowed authority, but authority stemming from responsibility and data. And in a knowledge work environment, where lines of responsibility can be blurred, this type of authority is what truly sustains. Porter and his team began to review the entire plan. Once the action boxes were filled, Sanderson asked them to sit down and read each line with a skeptical eye. Are there any pitfalls here? This scrutiny quickly revealed two potential risks. The first risk: a sharp increase in *** handovers* between individuals. Each document would pass through many hands, with each person holding a piece of responsibility. This increased the risk of delays or breakdowns in the workflow. Porter noted in the follow-up section, "Need to design a tracking mechanism to ensure no one misses a handover and to establish an early warning system for delays." The second risk: right at the initial stage of implementing the new process, the amount of training and supervision would be intense. Acme's staff was already busy. Now they had the added burden of learning to use standard document templates, how to input data into the terminology database, and how to comply with editing steps. If not anticipated, this alone could cause the plan to fail. Porter clearly wrote, "Need to prepare training time, provide close support, and have an adjustment mechanism if the team becomes overloaded." Sanderson looked at these additions and nodded. He reminded them, every plan harbors potential flaws. Follow-up is where we acknowledge risks from the outset and then design how to learn from them. Porter returned to the A3's logical framework. He reread the entire flow. The problem was stated at the beginning. Root causes were analyzed. Countermeasures had emerged. The plan clearly outlined who, what, when, how, and the follow-up section anticipated how to monitor, respond, and share lessons learned. All links were connected. He asked himself the final questions. Does this plan clearly state who is responsible for each action? How will we know if these countermeasures are truly effective? What additional problems might arise, and what mechanism will record and share those lessons with the entire organization? These questions weren't meant to close the A3, but to open the next PDCA loop. Porter understood a paradox. Planning and follow-up are not about ending one story, but about beginning another. Each A3 is just a stop on a long journey where the organization temporarily consolidates its understanding and then continues further. He signed his name at the bottom of the plan, not to conclude, but to confirm that he would be the first person responsible when the plan had to change. For he had learned an important lesson in the world of lean. A plan is never immutable. It is always a hypothesis, and the owner's responsibility is to continuously learn, adjust, and share. Chapter 6, Continuous PDCA, Developing A3 Thinkers. Porter once thought an A3 would conclude once he finished writing the countermeasures and the plan. But the more he worked with Sanderson, the more he realized that was merely an illusion. In Lean, an A3 never truly ends. It enters an endless loop: plan, do, check, act, and then returns to plan to start a new cycle. This is what defines the essence of continuous PDCA. An A3 is only valuable when it lives with the organization. This means no one should treat the follow-up section at the end of the paper as a mere formality. That is the core, because it forces everyone to look back. Did the countermeasures truly hit the mark? Did the results meet the objectives? What unexpected issues arose? And what lessons need to be recorded for next time? If an A3 is treated as a report to be filed away, all the effort becomes wasted. Porter observed and understood that continuous PDCA holds a paradox. The more you check, the more new problems emerge. But that isn't failure. That is precisely the meaning. Each check cycle opens an opportunity to learn, and each adjustment cycle becomes the foundation for the next improvement. Thus, an A3 is not an end punctuation mark, but a comma in the long story of an organization. He recalled his first Gemba walks, seeing so many inconsistencies. At that time, he thought simply writing solutions and plans would be enough. But only when he returned to the actual site to monitor results did he see that every countermeasure had limitations. The important thing wasn't finding a perfect solution, but maintaining the learning loop. When writing his second A3, Porter no longer viewed the follow-up as an obligation. He saw it as a place where he predicted risks, asked what-if questions, and prepared for the next cycle. He understood that every plan is merely a hypothesis, and his job was to use data to test that hypothesis and then adjust. This is also why the A3 became a distinctive tool. It wasn't about demonstrating perfection, but about publicly acknowledging imperfection. An organization that knows how to maintain continuous PDCA is one that accepts it will always be wrong somewhere, and importantly, learns from those mistakes. Porter clearly felt that when an A3 lives with the organization, it's not just paper but a continuous flow of learning. Porter realized that what was important wasn't how many A3s he wrote, but that he learned how to asterisk think according to the A3. Sanderson often reminded him, don't turn the A3 into a paperwork procedure. The goal isn't to produce more documents, but to create people who have an A3 mindset. This implies a fundamental change in how one approaches work. An A3 thinker won't jump straight to solutions, won't be satisfied with quick fixes, won't sugarcoat reports. Instead, they will immerse themselves in real-world observation, analyze cause and effect, verify data, and then learn from errors. The training isn't through lectures but through the very process of writing and debating A3s. Sanderson was like a teacher, but he never gave answers. He used the A3 as a tool to ask questions. Why did you go from this data point to that conclusion? Where is the connection? If the root cause is truly this, is that countermeasure logical? Each question forced Porter to revisit data, refine his logic, and learn independently. Porter began to clearly see that an A3 is only valuable when it forces the writer to follow the discipline of scientific thinking. It compelled him to describe the current state with facts, to find root causes instead of symptoms, to propose solutions based on cause and effect, and then to return to verify. Through each such cycle, he not only solved a problem, but also honed a habit of thinking. He realized that the organization didn't need many people who knew how to fill out forms, but needed A3 thinkers, people capable of seeing through problems, analyzing rigorously, and learning continuously. That was the true value of A3 implementation, developing people, not accumulating paperwork. Porter looked back at himself. At first, he wrote A3s as an administrative task, but now he saw each writing as an opportunity to train his mind. Each of Sanderson's questions was like a drill going deep into the layers of logic, and that very discomfort transformed him. He understood that writing an A3 was less important than letting the A3 change how he thought. Porter began to see the bigger picture. Every A3 he had ever written was no longer the end of a task, but a stopping point on a learning journey. When one A3 closed, it immediately opened the need for the next A3 at a deeper or broader level, like concentric circles. Each learning cycle created the foundation for the next. He realized the A3 was the DNA of the learning organization. It provided a common language, a common habit, a common thinking framework for everyone to exchange, critique, and progress together. Instead of meetings where everyone offered subjective opinions, now every discussion was based on an A3A single sheet of paper containing data, analysis, and logic. That transformed dialogue into collective learning. Porter saw an interesting paradox. The more A3s were written, the value didn't lie in the increased number of papers, but in the deepened thinking. Through each sheet, he and his colleagues learned to ask sharper questions, see things more clearly, and build more substantiated countermeasures. What remained at the end was not a collection of A3s, but a generation of people capable of thinking using the A3 methodology. He concluded that a strong organization isn't built by solving a few big problems, but by forming a team of people who know how to maintain continuous PDCA people who, by repeatedly practicing the habit of writing, verifying, adjusting, and learning, have made learning their daily breath. Sitting with Sanderson, looking at the stack of A3s that had been revised through many cycles, he didn't view them as archives, but as living proof of the process of forming someone who works with scientific thinking. He understood that he had transitioned from writing A3s as an obligation to living with it as a thinking method. And more importantly, he knew this wasn't the final stage. From now on, every A3 he wrote would merely be the beginning of a new learning cycle. Thank you for patiently joining me on this journey. From a blank, large sheet of paper to endless PDCA cycles. From simple, why, questions to delving deep into the structure of responsibility, we have clearly seen that the A3 is not just a tool, but a way to train organizational intelligence. And it is precisely in this process that each of us is forced to learn to look at ourselves. I invite you to pause for a moment and consider, how do you evaluate this book? What has it sparked in you about how you work, how you observe truth, or how you guide others to learn? Your feedback isn't just words, it's an extension of the dialogue this book initiates. If there's another book you'd like to explore together, please suggest it. Perhaps it's a classic we've often avoided, or a new one that leaves us bewildered. Each choice will open a new cycle of learning, and I will accompany you on that journey. Thank you for listening, not just with your ears, but with your attention and patience.